Saturday's 2-1 overtime loss to Utah featured something we don't really see much in the NHL these days, a coach screaming and even making contact with his captain.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Monday, October 21st, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Before we get started, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes, at Ian C. McLaren. For those of you who may be new to the podcast, I am a lifelong Bruins fan. Been hosting this podcast since 2019. Before that, I was a full-time news editor at The Score, covering all things hockey. I've also been writing about the Bruins for 20 years now, which is pretty crazy. Anyways, in all that time, rarely have we seen a Boston Bruins head coach do what Jim Montgomery did to Brad Marchand on Saturday. And lest you think I'm making a big deal out of nothing, it's worth noting that on the 32 Thoughts podcast this morning with Kyle Bukauskas and Elliotte Friedman, they opened with Jim Montgomery screaming at Brad Marchand on the Boston Bruins bench during the game on Saturday, and also making contact with the player, which in today's climate is not really acceptable. He didn't hit him or kick him as has happened in the past, but even that light contact could be seen as problematic. This all came after Marshon was dangling through the offensive zone through three Utah players. It led to a turnover and a goal at the other end of the ice, which was turned over based on an offside review. Still, it was egregious enough that it caught the attention of the head coach and caused him to lash out at Marshon. This is one of the key storylines, again, not just from this game, but also from a national perspective. They were talking about it on one of the biggest podcasts in hockey right off the top, and Friedman called it a jarring occurrence. Again, it's not something we see very regularly in the NHL. He wondered if there's anything going on behind the scenes here where this was kind of a tipping point between the two, or if it was just part of the game, the emotions coming out from what was a tight contest and a very bad turnover leading to another goal for the opposition. Thankfully, it was wiped out. And of course, the fact that he made contact with Marchand. Coaches are under a lot of scrutiny these days in terms of how they interact with the players. A lot of the things that were once acceptable are no longer. So that's something to keep an eye on. Not that I think there'll be any serious repercussions, but the relationship between the two is certainly something to keep an eye on, especially considering that Marchand is an unrestricted free agent at the end of this season, and Jim Montgomery, his contract is up after this season as well. So if there's a fracture there, it could lead to a parting of the ways with either party at some point or another. Now, Jim Montgomery was clearly frustrated after the eventual overtime loss, and that was partly due as well to the fact that David Pastrnak took a fairly careless penalty in overtime. The Bruins were able to kill, but Utah scored the game winner shortly thereafter. And he said quite plainly, in the last couple of years, the Bruins got off to great starts. They played fast. He doesn't like the pace that they're currently playing with. Being 3-2-1 at the start of the year, you look around the league, it's a fine record. The record he's not worried about. Results he's not worried about. It's the process, and the process is not consistently to our desires right now, is how he put it. We've talked ad nauseum about the ineffective middle six. We'll touch on that again later on in this podcast. Marshon has a team high 4 assists. He does lead the league with 9 penalties drawn, but he is still looking for his first goal of the season. Charlie Coyle, just 1 goal on the season. They've had rotating wingers there. The second and third lines, there's no consistency there to try to put a consistent product on the ice. So that's part of the problem as well. And I remember Bruce Cassidy talking about when he was head coach about how you can only cook with the ingredients that you're given. Jim Montgomery, if you look at this team, they have 4 or 5 guys who belong in the bottom 3 that he's trying to fit into top 6, top 9 roles. He said after, kind of jokingly, that maybe he needs to give the 4th line 16 minutes a night instead of 12 like he has, because the only goal scorer was Cole Koepke. That was assisted by Marchand, not either Beecher or Kostelic, but those 3 have been the best line for sure. He added he's not happy with the puck pressure. They've always got to be committed to checking, and right now he's not seeing it. So the coach clearly displeased with his team's effort, and it came out especially in relation to the captain, who he yelled, screamed. I'm not a lip reader, but I'm sure it wasn't a friendly chat. And your best players just simply have to be your best players. And for the Bruins right now, that has not been the case. Pastrnak has played pretty well, and he is on track to, challenge for 50, maybe 60 goals if all goes well, lead the team in scoring once again. He's an all-world winger. Marshon kind of seems to have lost a step or two, coming off 3 off-season surgeries. Of course, that doesn't help. He's well down when it comes to the team lead in points, yet to score a goal. And, of course, that turnover wasn't costly because it was called back, that goal, but it's still not something that you can get. And that's something that I talked about yesterday on X, that if, say, they have a guy like Fabian Lysell in the AHL right now, and the knock on him is maybe he tries to do too much, taking penalties in the offensive zone, what have you. If you're worried about that from Lysell, then he's in good company, because that's what's happening with the Bruins' best players at the moment. If the Bruins are worried about Lysell trying to do too much with the puck, leading to costly turnovers, or taking offensive zone penalties, he'll actually fit right in with their best players. And in fact, their best player at the moment is Cole Koepke, who's 3 goals, 3 assists. He's a +10 if you are interested in that stat. 1 point ahead of David Pastrnak, who's got 4 goals, 1 assist. So Pasternak's not really making plays as much as he did last season. Lindholm also with 5 points, tied with Mark Kostelic and John Beecher for the team lead. Marshon with 4 points, level with young Mason Lohrei, who's got 4 points in 5 games, including a goal. So your best players have to be your best players. Jim Montgomery clearly not happy with his best players after Saturday night's game, or during Saturday night's game. And we'll discuss some more stats and signals from that game here as the podcast continues. I hope you all enjoyed Sunday's NFL action. And if you weren't using the FanDuel app at the same time, then you were clearly missing out. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and they have some amazing deals to get you started this season. You can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. When you get the hunch in the middle of the game, all you have to do, open the app, check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Place a $5 bet, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed with your first $5 bet, I should add, whether or not that $5 bet hits. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and you can get in on the action right now with FanDuel.com. Let's check out some key stats from Saturday night's 2-1 overtime loss to the Utah Hockey Club. And Utah outshot the Bruins 32-23. That's something that we've talked about this season, dating back to last season. Boston's propensity to be outshot. And while Jeremy Swayman played very well in this one, keeping his team in the game, he had way too heavy of a workload in this one. 32 shots against compared to only 23 for the Bruins. It's obviously not a huge volume of shots, but to be outshot by 9, not great for the Bruins, especially against a team that was missing one of its top defensemen in Sean Durzi, who is out for the foreseeable future with an upper body injury. With the performance against Utah, a .938 save percentage in that game, Jeremy Swayman finally has his save percentage up above 900 for the season. He's currently at .905. I mentioned the penalties taken by the Bruins. They took 5 penalties in this one. Their total for minor penalties is now up to 34, which is 6 higher than the second place team in the NHL. The Los Angeles Kings, San Jose Sharks have both taken 28 minor penalties. The Bruins, 34 minor penalties through 6 games. That's almost 6 minors per game. That's 12 minutes shorthanded per game. And you just can't keep playing that undisciplined and expect success. It's just ludicrous to keep taking that amount of penalties. Nikita Zadorov leads the way with 19 penalty minutes for this team. Bunch of those minors, of course. Charlie McAvoy with 10 minutes of penalties. Zadorov just consistently taking penalties, and it's something that has to be tampered somehow. McAvoy had a high sticking penalty in the first period. Kostelic, a roughing penalty. Zadorov, a hooking penalty. Lindholm, tripping, and then David Pastrnak with the tripping penalty in overtime that, again, did not lead directly to a goal, but certainly tired some guys out, and they scored shortly thereafter. So when it comes to undisciplined play, Jim Montgomery has a real grievance here with the way that his team is playing. Taking minor penalties, you're putting your team behind the 8 ball, and it's undisciplined, careless in some instances, and you're just, making it harder for your goaltender, making it harder for your penalty killing units, and tiring guys out when they should be battling it out 5-on-5, where the majority of the game is played, and doing their thing. So that has to stop. And they need to rein that in. They cannot afford to be taking 5-6 minor penalties a night here, especially tomorrow night against a team like Nashville. We'll preview that game tomorrow, but they are winless. They have so much talent and just ready to break out. If you're taking those penalties against that team, that could very well come back to hurt you. Now, not only did Cole Koepke scored the only goal. He also led the team with 5 shots in only 12 minutes and 31 seconds of ice time, near the bottom of ice time among all forwards. So he made the most of his time on the ice. Pavel Zacha had 4 shots on goal to come in second, but Cole Koepke just continues to impress. I had said a week or so ago that, I wasn't too sure about him, but all this guy does is step up in big moments. It's kind of reminiscent of Sean Corrali back in the day, but to an even greater extent. And nobody expected this guy to come in and have 3 goals, 3 assists for 6 points through 82 games. He's on pace for 41. Obviously, that is not going to keep up. But if he gets more ice time, I said, hey, why not? He was on the ice when he scored with Marshon and Coyle. Why not keep him up there and give him some more prime ice time? See what he can do on the second line. He's not going to keep up his shooting percentage, of course. He's got 3 goals on 12 shots for 25% shooting percentage. That's not going to maintain itself, but still incredibly impressive start to the season for Cole Koepke, who, for whatever reason, was not able to crack with Tampa, who he played with previously. And yeah, why not give him a shot up on the second line at this point? It cannot get any worse than what some other guys are bringing to the table. Morgan Geekie was added back to the lineup, as was Justin Brazeau. Brazeau with 0 shots in 11 minutes and 15 seconds. Geekie only with 1 shot on goal. We'll talk about this later on in the podcast, but again, something needs to be changed here because the middle 6 especially is not working. Trent Frederick got a bump to the second line. He only had 1 shot on goal in this one. The Bruins, just have not been able to find that consistency on the ice, but it's again partly due to the fact that there's been no consistency in the lineup, finding the right mix. That has been a problem for Jim Montgomery and for the Bruins. Now, the Bruins did have 29 hits compared to only 12 for Utah, so they were physical, but that's usually a sign that Utah had the puck. And you're usually hitting more when you have the puck less. You're not throwing hits if you always have the puck on hand. So take that stat with a grain of salt as well. They did have 19 block shots, so that effort was there. But overall, the story in this one was undisciplined play. Once again, 5 minor penalties. Marshon with that turnover that drew the ire of the head coach. And some real need to find consistency in the lineup and on the ice. And we'll discuss some more signals from this game here as the podcast continues. If you need to hire, then you quite simply need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying Indeed sent you, or that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply, but if you need to hire, you need Indeed. All right, we have some lineup issues to discuss here, folks. First of all, signals moving forward. It'll be interesting to see if Marshon, Montgomery asked about the incident on the bench, what their thoughts are. The team was off on Sunday. They're preparing for tomorrow evening's game in Nashville. It's a loaded schedule tomorrow. All 32 teams playing like 15-minute staggered start times. It should be pretty interesting. I believe they're already in Nashville. They'll probably hit the ice today, so we'll see what comes, if anything. I'm sure there will be some diplomatic responses, but you never know. Now, the lineup certainly needs to be fixed. And I posted on X yesterday some of my thoughts, and here's kind of a summary. The problem for the Bruins is only 3 players are waiver exempt: Matt Poitras, Mason Lohrei, John Beecher. They need all 3. All 3 are important players at this point. But they don't want to risk losing guys like Max Jones, Riley Tufte, or Justin Brazeau by placing them on waivers for the purpose of assignment. That's not to say that losing either of those 3 players is a big deal. I don't believe that necessarily. But what we do know is that Don Sweeney is a big asset management guy, and it's easier right now to hold on to those guys than risk losing them on waivers. I just believe that he is intent, until we see otherwise, they're trying to make these pieces work. And it's only been 6 games. There could be room for improvement. But for me, any of those 2 guys should be sent down to make room for a Fabian Lysell call-up. He played pretty well over the weekend with a couple points, as well as signing Tyler Johnson, who's waiting in the wings on a PTO. I'm not saying the Bruins shouldn't risk losing one of those guys on waivers, but every day it doesn't happen proves they don't want to risk it, in my opinion. I would have waived, I wouldn't have even signed Riley Tufte. I don't think Justin Brazeau has shown enough to warrant, for him to think, I've made it. I'm an NHL player, night in and night out. Again, 0 shots on goal in the last game. And he's not really the speediest player either. I think this mix just isn't working at the moment. And they have too many guys who are borderline lineup players or bottom line players. You have, Brazeau sometimes on the second line, Frederick, Poitras, Geeky, Tufte, Jones out of the lineup altogether. The Bruins, I think, would benefit from having Tyler Johnson's, and people say, oh, he was a minus 35 last year. I don't really care about that stat. What I care about is 17 goals for a pretty bad Blackhawks team last year. 2 Stanley Cups, all the experience in the world. Fabian Lysell, turnovers, doing too much by himself. Whatever. You saw the turnovers. You saw taking a bad offensive zone penalty in the game against Utah from your best players. What can it hurt, really? You need that speed. You need that skill. It's something your team is dearly lacking. You don't need to wait for him to be a perfect player to give him a shot. Right now, this mix, yes, there's 3-2-1, but that's 3 wins, 3 losses. And the offense, very stagnant. They need an injection of something at the moment. Yes, their best players need to be their best players. You can't have that from Marchand. You can't have that from Pastrnak. You can't have Cole Koepke leading your team in scoring. But at the same time, you can't also have 5 fourth-line players in the lineup and 2 guys sitting off who, when you put them in, it's one thing to have 14 forwards that can contribute. But if you have 2 guys sitting out, and I think Jones has higher upside than Brazeau and Tufte. Keep him around. He's had a rough start with injuries and whatnot. Keep him around, perhaps coming in with Johnson as an extra forward. Put Lysell, give him a shot in the lineup and see what happens. It cannot get any less effective than what they're putting out at the moment. That's my thoughts on this game, at least. I did love to see Jeremy Swayman playing very well, up to his abilities, raising that save percentage above 900. Obviously, it was amazing to see Koepke out there scoring once again. What a fantastic story for the Bruins here early on. Troubling to see that disconnect between Marshon and Montgomery. And again, not to overstate it, but your coach screaming at your captain and even making contact, as light as it was, that's not something that you see very often here in today's NHL. So we'll see if there's any repercussions, if there's any discussions. Obviously, they'll be behind the scenes, but with both guys potentially having their contracts end at the finale of this season, it's something worth keeping an eye on for sure. That's it for today's episode, my friends. Thank you so much for taking some time to chat. I hope you all had fantastic weekends. Please do check out the Locked On NHL Fantasy Podcast next. Steal and Flip will give you all the information you need to get a leg up on the opposition. We'll be back tomorrow with the first Atlantic Division Power Rankings, as well as a preview of Tuesday's game against the Nashville Predators, as well as bring you all the latest on the Black and Gold, because that's what we do here on Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.